Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
My Bigfoot sighting happened in late July of 2017. But before we get to that, I would like to explain to you the stories that I grew up with. The first one, starting off, I was probably about 6 or 7. And my papa told me a story about a Bigfoot that had happened in, I believe he said it was around 1902, 1903 is the first one he told me about. Don't quote me on that because, I was, 6 or 7 years old. So my Uncle JR and my papa and his family and stuff used to log hardwoods and softwoods like pine and pin oak and red oak and stuff like that out of the thicket in East Texas. And my Uncle JR come running out of the woods, from what my papa was telling me, that he's screaming and yelling, man's white as a ghost. And he grabbed my papa in the clearing where they were at. This man was back in there by himself, mile in the woods. And when he got to my papa, he told him, he said, don't ever go in the woods without a gun. And I'm not talking a pea shooter. I'm talking, bigger than a 12 gauge. Because what I just seen, there's nothing back in there. There's no reason why it should be there. So my papa tells me the story, and he says the man comes running out of the woods. He's white as a ghost. They're trying to get him to calm down, and he's like, run, run, run. And my papa sets him down next to the wagon train where they were at. They had 13 hand-high mules, and they used these mules to pull the logs out of the woods, and they had a wagon that had all their tools and stuff like that on it. And he sets him down next to the wheel, next to the wagon, and this man is just drenched in sweat and bleached of all color. And he's telling, I'm sorry, let me correct that. It wasn't my papa that was there. It was my papa's dad. So it was my great grandpa and then his Uncle JR, I believe. And my papa's dad had questioned this man as to what was going on. He said, I seen something that was a monster of, myth or whatever. And he goes, this thing was huge. It was, 10 foot plus or, whatever. He's flipping out. He's screaming at these guys and stuff to get out of there. And he tells him, he says, you can't go in them woods without a gun. And you need something bigger than a 12 gauge because these things are monsters. They're massive. I don't believe anything less than a 12 gauge would hurt it. He said that he was cutting a tree down back there or marking it or something like that. And this thing peered around a bush. He had been looking in that direction for about 20 minutes because he kept hearing something. And as I can recall, he kept hearing like a chirp, but it wasn't a bird. He said it was, sounded like something making a bird noise, like a human, because it was obviously too big to be a bird. And all of a sudden he seen something pop its head around the bush, and he looked over it and he was like, what the heck is that? And he's got, all this stuff on him, his backpack and all that stuff or whatever it is that he has with him. And he said this thing popped its head around and then it just stood up. And he said that he just kept looking as it was standing up. And it seemed like it took forever for it to fully go erect. And he said that's when he just frozen fear. And this thing just stared at him like, your food, you know? And that's how he felt. Like he was on the dinner menu. And, he took off running after the thing turned its back and walked away. He felt safe enough to, you know, hightail it out of there. He gets to the clearing where my pawpaw's daddy is and his other brothers and stuff like that. And, that's when, you know, he describes to them what he's seen and stuff like that. And after they get him to calm down and stuff. And this man never went back in the woods. I mean, he moved out of that town. And back then there was really nowhere to find work at. So, you know, he had to wind up coming back. But he moved into the larger city that's next to the town where this happened at. And, he never had another experience because he wouldn't go back in the woods. So my pawpaw told me that story. And then the next one was that I was told, my nanny and my pawpaw both told me this story. This actually happened to them where they lived at. There were 3 houses. And the front by the road was my great aunt's house. And then it was my nanny and pawpaw's house in the middle. And in the back by the barn was my great grandmother's house. And in between all of these houses, there was a well. It was, oh, heck, I don't know, probably 50, 60 yards out from my nanny and pawpaw's house. And every morning, my pawpaw would come out there to get water, and the bucket would be right side up, half full of water. Well, at night, they would shut the well door, and then they would flip the bucket upside down so sediment and, you know, dust and stuff like that wouldn't fly in it. And every morning for years, I can't recall exactly how many years, but for years, my pawpaw said that he would see that bucket flipped right side up on top of the well door, and the well door was closed and be half full of water. And he said that he didn't know exactly what it was that was doing that. And one day he figured it out. He said that it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning and he heard something outside. So he looked through the window and he seen what he described as the tallest, hairiest bear he had ever seen. But it didn't make sense to him because there's no bears in that area. So he went out there the next morning because he wasn't about to go out there and see what it was face to face in the middle of the night. You know, this is in the 1950s. There's no electric lights out there. There's no street lights. So you can't really see anything. And he's describing this as a silhouette. He's not describing it as, you know, he's seen it and he can give you details off of it. Anyway, he went out there and there's footprints around the well this time because it had just rained, and they're embedded in the mud. And he said that they had to have been easily 15, 16 inches long and 8 to 10 inches across. But what struck him as strange was the fact that the footprint was embedded so far down in the soil. He said that whatever it was had to be a very heavy creature to step down on that soil and embed that print into the soil a good 2 inches. He said, you know, one of my uncles, I don't recall his name, was out there and stepped next to it. And this man is, you know, 6'2", 6'3", and every bit of 250 pounds. And he could only get it to go down about a half an inch. So that's the second story. The third story I was told is pretty detailed. One of my family's really good close friends, Bill, was a baby at the time when this happened. And I believe it was, you know, probably in the 50s, very, very early 60s. His daddy was a gunsmith, and he worked out of an old school bus on the same property where the well's at, you know, rebuilding guns and stuff like that. And they had built a little house off to the side. I believe within that time frame, it was just a one-room shack type of thing. Bill's daddy's a big man. He was 6'6", 6'7", somewhere in that area, every bit of 300, 340 in that area. And they had a cat that they kept in the house because of mice and stuff like that. And Bill's mama was on the right-hand side of the bed. Bill was in the middle, and Bill's daddy was on the left-hand side of the bed. And the way the story was told to me was through the perspective of Bill's daddy, not the mama. Bill's daddy, felt something hairy crawling across his chest because he slept without a shirt, without anything on. Actually, he was, butt naked. He said he felt something hairy going across his chest, so he just figured it was the cat, And all of a sudden, he wakes up, and there's this big creature, like literally inside of the house, reaching over Bill's daddy. If I recall right, his name is, I want to say it's RC. Anyway, he's seen this thing reaching over to grab the baby, and that's when it started. There was a tussle. This man was actually fighting this thing. I don't know how that turned out. I mean, obviously it wasn't able to, hurt the man or anything like that to the point to where he passed away, but he tussled with this thing, and he had, I guess, got to a shotgun somehow, or the mom got to the shotgun, and they unloaded on it, and it just kind of grunted at him and ran out of the house. He said that this thing wasn't that tall. It was, probably 6.5, 7 feet tall. And RC had some run-ins with these things before, so he figured it was, a juvenile. Well, he said that my Aunt Mert gave them some money and told them to move out of there because they like to take kids and kidnap them, and God knows what they do with them, eat them or whatever. And she said that it wasn't safe for them to be there anymore because they have small children. And she gave some money to my nanny and papa and did the same thing, and they moved out to Abilene. And I was probably about 8 when I was told that story, and I found it highly unbelievable. I mean, I'm 8. Then I had 4 other people in my family tell me that same exact story, almost identical to what I had just said. Whether I'm leaving out details or whatever, I don't know. It's been a while since I've heard that story. The next encounter that I was told about, my nanny and my papa lived in the middle house on that same property. And my Aunt Mert had a root cellar dug into the side of this hill. And every now and again, every so often, they would, come outside and the door would be open and stuff would be missing out of it. And one night, my papa had noticed that the door was open. He went out there and closed it. He comes back into the house, and he didn't think nothing of it. And they're all asleep and everything, and my mom is the oldest of the children, and then it's my Uncle Bubba, and then it's my Uncle Bob, my Uncle Larry, my Uncle Joe, and my Aunt Christy. I believe they only had the 3 oldest at the time, which was my mom, Uncle Bubba, and my Uncle Bob. And they were all sleeping in one room because obviously, it's another one-room shack type of thing. But they were all sleeping in one room. And the house was kind of built on a slope. So the front of the house was on a pillar system. And it's, probably about 6 to 8 inches off the ground. And then when you get to the back porch, it's a good 8 feet off of the ground. So the room that they're all sleeping in is in the middle of the house. I'm guessing, it's somewhere between 4 and 5 feet off of the ground, the sill of the floor. And the window is at the base of the window, probably a good 8 feet. Well, they had just planted a flower bed right there around that side of the house. And my mom woke up to my my Uncle Bubba and my Uncle Bob screaming that something was looking in the window at them and was like tapping on the glass. And she, woke up my nanny and my papa. My papa looked out there and he didn't see anything because it took off at that time. And they had this really aggressive dog on a chain out front. And my mom said what woke up my Uncle Bubba and my Uncle Bob was the dog going off, like yanking at the chain and growling. He wasn't barking. He was just growling, like as if he's seen a mountain lion or something. And that woke them up. And then they turned to look outside and they're face to face with this thing. And my mom's now flipping out, waking up my nanny and papa, and they didn't see anything or whatever. And my nanny goes out there the next day and there's 2 footprints embedded in the soil. And there's a face print and 1 handprint on the glass. And it's only the left side of the face as if it was looking in at an angle to where it could see the kids. And my nanny and papa was on their left side of that window. So it didn't see them. It was looking at the kids. And then that ends it for that one. And then the next story I was told by my Uncle Larry and my Uncle Bubba. They were outside with Bill and Tyke, I believe. And Tyke is Bill's brother, who is I want to say that their daddy and mama's name is R.C. and Liz Smith. Anyway, they had railroad ties out there, and they had been out there jumping up and down on one, trying to break it. Because, it's, I'm macho. I'm more macho than you. I can break this thing. You can't. It got dusk. And by this time, they had put up a halogen light outside to where, you could see the front of the barn. And all of a sudden, where they had the light at, it was right next to the edge of the wood line, and it was almost directly over that railroad tie. They had one on top of the other, and it was teeter-tottering. And they had something over one end of it so it wouldn't pop up, I guess, so that they could try to get it stabilized to jump on it and break it. Anyway, it had become dusk, and it was 6:30, and it was already getting pretty dark. And this is towards the end of summer. And my Uncle Bubba and my Uncle Larry were the only 2 left out there. And my Uncle Bubba got tapped on the shoulder and then punched by my Uncle Larry because he wasn't paying attention. My Uncle Larry didn't say one word. He just pointed. And my Uncle Bubba and him described to me this long, hairy, muscular leg, they said, would put a cow's leg to shame. Reached out and stomped on this railroad tie and just completely cracked it in half or whatever. And then it just came back into the woods and they didn't see it again. The next story is my Aunt Mert had prize cows and a prize bull, and my Uncle Chesley, and these are my great uncle and great aunt, were sitting in the house, and my Aunt Mert heard her bull going off in the field, just bellowing. And he came out there. They had a barbed wire fence that was 4 rows. So you have 4-strand barbed wire fence, which is pretty high. It's probably about 4 feet or so. And this thing was out there. My Uncle Chesley told my papa that he seen the daggum thing. He grabbed his shotgun from beside the door, and it had buckshot in it. And he was fairly close to it when he shot this thing. I guess this thing had broke this bull's neck and threw it over his shoulder. And then when he shot it, it didn't even make a sound. It just jumped over the fence and took off with a whole bull. How big the bull was, how old the bull was, I have no idea. My papa told me that story because my Uncle Chesley, I guess, had told him that story. My mom and my Uncle Bob and my Uncle Bubba had all told me the story. This next one, they didn't tell me these stories all together. you hear about these things in stories where they grab something and they twist the limb off of it. Well, going back to the first story that I told you guys about the mules that are 13 hands high, they had rather large horses as well, Clydesdales and stuff like that. And one of the horses they had was, I believe, an Appaloosa. I believe it was a speckled Appaloosa. And it was in the barn. And my mom said that her and my Uncle Bubba and my Uncle Bob went down to the well to get water. And the barn's not too far off from the well, 60 yards or so. And they heard the horse in there neighing. And then they heard it kick the side of the stable inside the barn. And they went in there and the door was, popped open. And that's unusual because they always close the door when it starts getting dusk for the horses. Because there are, mountain lions and stuff like that in the area. And my mom said she peeked in the wind, like through the door, sorry, not windows, through the door of the barn. And she seen this thing that was just big and hairy. I mean, a massive creature, she said. Kind of like the thing that was looking through the window, she said. Grabbed this horse by the back leg and twist it and yank it off of this horse. She watched it happen. And then she said she looked up and another one was jumping down from the hayloft onto the ground and it shook the whole ground, she said. And her and my Uncle Bubba and my Uncle Bob all ran back to my nanny and papa's house screaming, which in turn had my Uncle Chesley and my papa and all them come out of the house. And this is probably in the 1970s. They had already moved back from Abilene, Texas. And they all come running out of the house and they have shotguns and stuff. And my papa told me that he seen one run out of the front and he didn't see another one. And my mom and my Uncle Bubba and my Uncle Bob had all said that there was two of them in there. Well, my papa and my Uncle Chesley went up to the door to look and see if there was another one in there, and there wasn't. I guess it had already ran out or something. But the horse was laying over there and it was missing both of its back legs and its neck had been twisted to where its head was all the way around facing its rear end. And, they had just gotten that horse. It was rather expensive. It was, for my Aunt Mert's, I guess she wanted to show it or something. And, all they found leading out of the barn was footprints because it had been raining or whatever and the ground was saturated that were leading into the thicket to the left side of the barn. And they seen branches that were snapped. It was whatever it was running through there. It was, tall enough to break 3-inch branches 8 feet up into the tree. And these are all pine and stuff like that. So anybody knows anything about, green pine, that stuff doesn't just snap. It's like you twist rope, essentially. Now, keep in mind, when I was growing up, I wasn't living in the same town that they were living in. We were living in the city next to that town. It's 17, 18 miles away from there. And at the time when I was being told these stories, it was the county. It wasn't the city yet. And they had a nice house on roughly about 2 acres of property. Anyway, it never really dawned on me that these things could exist. I always just kind of believed that they were fake or whatever, these people are, drinking too much moonshine type of thing. So I had gone fishing my whole life out in that area where they were talking about. And there's this creek down there called Little Cypress. And me and my papa used to go fishing there all the time, overnight a lot of the time. And he would tell me these stories and stuff. And him and his good buddy WL, I want to believe is his name. We were at that creek or we were at another creek and they told me a story about them being out there late at night, and, you know, both of them were kind of drinking some beer and stuff and whatnot, and they're fishing and all that good stuff. And my papa tells me he gets up to go check the live line where they have the catfish at that's hanging off of the bank into the water. It's tied to a branch or whatever. And he's checking it just because water moccasins like to come up and, bite the fish and try to get them off the line and eat them and stuff like that. And he checks the fish, are fine. On his way back, he hears, to him, what sounds like an oversized ape yelling in the woods. He said it sounded like an oversized ape. His exact description of that was like, oh. So he gets back to the campfire and he's talking to WL about what was that sound, and WL's like, oh, I have no idea, man. Like, that's kind of weird. So they don't hear anything for a while. If anybody's ever been in the thick woods and they've been in there far enough, sound reverberates and echoes and bounces off of those trees and stuff. And something could be 2 feet in front of you and sound like it's a mile away, or be a mile away and sound like it's 2 feet in front of you. Anyway, they're like, oh, it sounded pretty far off, but it could be closer or whatever. And they both, latch a hold of their firearms while they're sitting there by the fire. They got their lines out in the water and stuff too. And, they're not too far away from them. They're, sitting there drinking or whatever. I guess they just gave up on the point of actually fishing or whatever. And, all of a sudden, a good 10, 15 minutes after that sound, 20 minutes after the sound, something like that, my papa said that they heard another sound like I guess it's called like samurai chatter. They didn't know what it was back then. This is heck in the early 70s, late 60s, somewhere in that area. They said they heard that and it sounded like it was coming from behind a couple of tree rows from where they were at. Like, it was a good, 10, 15, 20 feet into the tree line from where they were at in the clearing. And to give you an idea of this clearing, my papa said you drive down an old dirt road and they're way back off in the woods. You're not just making a right and turning left immediately. You're traveling 20, 30 minutes from the highway to get to your favorite fishing hole type of thing. And then you're getting out of your truck and you're walking into where you want to go to. Anyway, the clearing is, you take an old dirt road, you get out of the truck and you walk a path for, I want to say he said about 100 feet, 200 feet, somewhere in that area. And, it comes to a round clearing and it's right off of the bank of the river. Anyway, they're sitting there and they hear the samurai chatter, and they've never heard anything like that. And they're sitting there talking about it, and they're like, man, dude, we should just pack up and get on out of here. And then all of a sudden, not even seconds after that samurai chatter, they said they heard something that sounded like a steam locomotive running through the woods. And they could hear trees and branches being broken and stuff like that. And, I do believe that my papa said that they left all of their stuff there and just hightailed it out of there. I believe that's what he said had happened. WL's account of that is, he told me the same story, same exact story, except for he told me something my papa didn't tell me because he had never, said anything about it. He said that whatever that thing was, he had seen eye shine from the fire glinting off of its eyes. And he said that this thing's eyeballs lit up like a candle. He said it reminded him of the old lanterns that the coal miners used. They're little rectangular tin lanterns that have a candle inside of it with a glass lens in the front. And he said it reminded him of that. And that's the only thing that he had seen. And the whole time they hadn't smelt anything, nothing like that. I didn't hear anything about smell about these things until later on in my life. So they hightailed it out of there or whatever, and they jump back in the truck after they get down the trail, and they get out of there. And my pawpaw gets home and is, telling my nanny about the things that just happened and stuff, because she was asking me, I thought you were going to be gone overnight type of thing fishing. And it's probably 10:30, 11 o'clock at night when he shows back up the house. And he recounts this story to her, and she says, man, it's those things that we dealt with out in Harlton. They didn't know exactly what to call them because there wasn't really a name for it other than, men of the woods or hairy men or whatever. So the next story I was told by my pawpaw, he said, this is small town thinking for you if you want to kind of get a grasp on why this came out the way it did. My pawpaw told me that there was Quakers that had traveled down through there, and there was an old wagon trail back behind their property where they used to live at in that small town. He said that he thinks that, they got lost back in there in the 1700s, and, they turned into these big hairy things, not understanding that, these things have probably been there since before people ever arrived here. The Native Americans have been dealing with them, I guess, this whole time. Anyway, he said that he thinks that they were Quakers and they turned into these big hairy wild men is another one that he liked to call. He said wild men. And, they got lost back in there or whatever. They turned into the wild man. And he said that he took that trail one day just to kind of see where it led to. He was early in his 20s. He had already met my nanny. He was 21, 22. She was 14, 15 years old. And maybe she was older. I don't remember. Heck. He took this trail back down into the woods, and the creek that I was talking about, Little Cypress, actually runs through the property that my family used to own. It runs back, way back into the distance. I mean, it goes on forever. So he had taken that trail back off in there, and he had just dead ended in the woods. I mean, he couldn't really follow it any further. And, he had told my Uncle Larry and my Uncle Bob about this trail and stuff like that. So they were pretty well determined to, I guess, jump on some horses and go riding through there to go look and see if they can't find the end of this trail. They got on their horses and whatnot, and, they went back down off into the woods where this wagon trail had led into. Whether it was a highly used area or not, I don't know. I don't know how they knew that wagon trail was there or whatever, unless it was passed down for generations about where it was at. But my Uncle Bob and my Uncle Larry had taken this trail. They followed the wagon trail. They went down into the woods, and they rode for about an hour or so, and they started smelling something really funny. It smelled like, dead animals and stuff like that. And they come upon a mound that's in the middle of the woods. And when I say it's thick in there, I mean, there's vines that creep off of the trees that have thorns on them. These vines are like cable, and the thorns are rock hard, and they're a good half-inch long, quarter-inch long. So, they get off the horses because it's real thick right there, and there's an obvious opening like a game trail that they can go through. And the horses are spooked anyway. They don't want to go any further. They're flipping out. They're throwing their front hooves up and stuff like that. So they tie them off to the tree, and they walk down in there. And my Uncle Larry, I never got a story about this out of my Uncle Bob. He wouldn't talk about it. My Uncle Larry said that they came upon this mound, and the mound had a huge hole dug into it. And just to the right of the mound, there was a pile. I want to say he said it was like a compost pile almost, but he could see bones sticking out of it. he didn't know what kind of bones they were. He never went into too much detail about it, but he said that's where the smell was coming from. There was flies all over it, some maggots and stuff like that. But there was a pile about, I want to say he said about 2 to 3 feet high, and it was probably a good 5 to 6 feet in diameter. And it was just, rotting material. And he said it was, possible deer carcasses and stuff like that right there. Anyway, they heard something moan out of the cave, and they hightailed it out of there. They ran and jumped on the horses, and the horses, when they took off, threw my Uncle Larry off, and my Uncle Larry had to actually run. It was either my Uncle Larry or my Uncle Bob. They had to run. One of them had to run to catch up to the horse, which the other one had already grabbed the reins of it, and they jumped on and took off again, or whatever happened with that. But he said that he believes that that's a Bigfoot cave, and he believes that they take whatever they're eating and they stuff it in that pile to let it kind of decay a little bit so they can pull the meat off the bones. I don't know how true that is. I have no idea. I'm not an expert on these things. I doubt anybody really actually is. But I want to say the next story dates back to the early 1800s, mid 1800s. I don't remember exactly how the story was told. I was young. My papa told me a story about some city folks that had came down in there, and people go missing in these woods all the time. They think they know what they're doing. They go down there to go fishing and stuff like that, and they pop up missing. Anyway, there was some city folk that came in from a larger town in the area, and they had came down in there to look at land, I guess, possible prospect of buying or purchasing property. And their wagon was found on the side of what would be the main highway, like 154 or something like that. I don't know if it was called that back then or not, but it was found on the side of the highway. The horses were gone. They weren't even attached to the wagon anymore. The wagon was kind of slung sideways and had hit a tree. The people that were on there, on the wagon, I guess it was a man and his brother or something like that. A man and his wife. I don't remember exactly. But one of them had been yanked off of the wagon. The one that would be in the passenger seat on the right-hand side of the wagon had been yanked off of the wagon and dragged into the woods. And it's early morning hours. It's just breaking dawn when this had happened. And the driver said that he doesn't understand what happened. He was yanked off of the wagon too, but somehow he got away. He never seen what it was that had done it or whatever. But the passenger had never been seen again. And the driver was explaining this to, I want to say it was my great uncle or something like that, who, found the wagon or whatever, and the driver on the side of the road just kind of dazed out of his head. And the driver had explained to him later on that there was 2 of us on that wagon. I don't know where the passenger went. Something happened. I heard the passenger screaming and yelling, and then I look up and there's just silhouettes. That's all I could see was just silhouettes and the oncoming light, the rise of the sun and stuff. And that's as far as that story got with me. And then where my nanny and papa grew up at in that area, where my papa grew up at in that area, there was some Native Americans there a long time ago that I don't know that they're still in that area or not. He said that they passed down stories about the great hairy one that's in the woods. And when you grow a crop, this is what they passed down to the people that were living there. When you grow a crop, you take a portion of that crop and you set it out by the wood line for the great hairy one to come, like the spirit of the forest or whatever, to come and take as an offering of peace. Whether my family ever did that or not, I don't know, but they said that, you have to set out an offering for these things, because if you don't, they'll come and terrorize you. And when they say terrorize, they mean they're gonna kill livestock and stuff like that and take it, because you should have fed them a portion of that crop, because you're in their territory, you're on their land. And they told stories about, some of them are really aggressive, really mean. They will actually hunt your kids and stuff. And that's where that your kids are not safe around these things. The women are not safe around these things. And they'll kill men, but they don't necessarily drag them off. They want the women and children. And the story goes that some of them are really aggressive, and they like to kidnap children and eat children because they're soft. You don't have to wait to eat them. They can just eat them. Women, I guess they want to mate with them or eat them or whatever. And there are some that, help kids out, that help people out. They don't, they're not aggressive. They're very passive. With that said, the next story comes out. Bill's wife, when she was young, used to walk through the woods to the bus stop, and she would always have interactions with these things, and they were never aggressive. They were always really passive with her. She said for the first couple of months, it scared her really bad, because she's getting up at 5 a.m. and she's walking to the bus stop by 5:30 after she gets ready to go to school, and it's still dark outside. She's walking down the trail, and she can hear them to the right and the left. Sorry, I'm trying to recall as to how this was told. She can hear them walking from the right to the left, and it's the right and left side of her. Sorry. Anyway, she would hear little chirps and mumbles and a giggle, she said it was. But she would walk to the bus stop. She had to go through this trail. This trail was, she said, roughly a 5 to 10 minute walk. She was not very good with distance, to go from her house to the bus stop. And it was quicker to take the trail than to walk all the way down the driveway and then get out to the road. And the bus stop was in front of the trail rather than being in front of the driveway. So, she's walking down that way and whatever. She leaves her backpack on the porch of her house. One day she walks down the trail, she gets to the bus stop, and all of a sudden her backpack is at the bus stop when she shows up down there. And she had just been thinking about it, that she had left it there. And she was wondering how that got there. So I assumed that, one of these things had grabbed this backpack and taken it down the trail and dropped it off right there at the end of the trail. She said that she had several experiences with these things. She said she never actually really saw one, but she heard them, and she, could see, silhouettes or whatever. And one of her I think she only told me 2 stories of these things. The next one is of her. I believe that she told me that she was talking to one through her cracked window, like it was chirping like a sparrow, and she was doing the whistle and the noise back to it. And she said that it would mimic the yip of a dog, like a type of thing. Anyway, she said that she would have this conversation with it, or she had this conversation with it rather, and it's sitting outside the window, I guess, and she didn't know what it was, but she never felt threatened by these things. Her husband, on the other hand, had always felt threatened by these things, because Whether he actually seen one or not, I don't know. He never really went into detail about that. But he said that he's had, log chains and stuff like that just broken and, stuff thrown at him and stuff like that. He said he had a log chain tied up to a tree because they were pulling the frame back into position for a car or something like that. And he heard a bang that night. He went out there the next day and the log chain is just pulled in half and the car is pushed all the way to the other side of the property. The detail about that is that the vehicle is a 1950s or 1960s Chevy truck. It's a heavy truck. The tires are flat on it, and I believe where they were trying to pull the frame back to straighten it out at was the back right passenger side under the bed. I guess they had already had the bed off of it and whatnot, and the tire was actually bent to where the front of the tire was facing, where it would be facing lined up with the front tire, was facing in towards the driver's side cab. And something had pushed it all the way across the property, which is where that clearing from the opening of the clearing on one side to the other is. It's, I want to say, a good 150 yards. And something had pushed it all the way back over to the other tree line. And then he said that he's had baseball sized rocks thrown at him and stuff like that. And he's had pebbles tossed at him. He's had stuff just randomly come up missing on the property. And he has found stuff that's came up missing on the property down at the creek. I think that's it as far as his stuff goes. My nanny told me about some stuff that happened when my mom was young. This is roughly about the same time that, my Aunt Mert had given money to R.C. Smith and to my papa to get out of Dodge. My nanny had told me some stuff. She said that whatever it was that was making the noise outside would always go to the window where my mom was at, where she was at in her bassinet. She was newborn. And it would always tap on the glass right where she was at. And my nanny would get up and open up the curtain. There wouldn't be anything there. She said it was like a ninja, if you will. 1 second it's there, the next second it's not. And then she said that as it continued to do so, my nanny would move my mom closer to the bed, and then it would start tapping on the wall where she was at. And my nanny said that really creeped her out. And it always happened after dusk, say 8:30 at night or so. And she said that it would continue to happen throughout the night. And this happened the entire time that they lived there until they moved to Abilene. This thing would tap on the wall or the window, wherever my mom was at. So I gathered the feeling that when that thing was looking in the window at my Uncle Bob and my mom and my Uncle Bubba, it was looking at my mom. So it never showed like an aggressive standpoint from what my nanny said. It just, would tap on the glass or the wall or whatever. I don't know if it was a male or female. I have no idea. But my nanny told me that, she would occasionally hear things in the woods. She would see stuff running in the woods in the later hours of the evening. She actually got to the point to where she wouldn't send the kids outside to get water or anything like that from the well. And if they fed the animals, they had to do it earlier in the evening rather than later. She said that she's had things jiggle the doorknob as to see if they could open it or whatever. She said as far as it goes, she doesn't think that it knows how to open the door necessarily. Whether or not all of them are like that, I don't know. She said, but it liked to mess with the kids. they would be out in the yard or something, even during the daytime, and there would be rocks, like little pebbles, thrown out of the woods towards them. It's left like little birds and twigs and rocks and stuff like that on the porch of their house, their back porch. If I recall right, it would always leave like some type of food or a trinket, like I said about the rocks and stuff like that. But it had a habit of leaving like pecans and berries and stuff. There's not very many pecan trees where I grew up at and where they had grown up at. There are some, but there's not a whole bunch. So, you know, where it got the pecans from and how far it took it from there to there, I have no idea. That said, my pawpaw and I were at Little Cypress one night, and it's almost our entire family's there, actually, to be honest with you, because we're having a fish fry and we're cooking fish and we're staying the night and stuff. My Aunt Christy goes to tell me that they were there one time and she heard something in the woods, like stomping its foot, like how a bull elk or a buck, like a white-tailed buck, will throw its front leg down and knock on the ground to kind of show its dominance, like a bluff charge, essentially. And she said she didn't know what it was. She didn't know where it was at, but on the other side of the creek, she could hear the same thing happening. And then all of a sudden she hears a massive splash in the creek. And it's just, I believe it's just her and my pawpaw and I think my Uncle Bob down there at the time. She heard a splash and then you could see ripples in the water. But then they heard, you know, aggressive growls and it sounded like something was biting something else and it sounded like it was fighting in the water. I don't know how far it was. It was enough a ways away that they couldn't really see what it was. So they just assumed that it was, you know, whitetails or whatever. There's another story that dates back to, I want to say the 1800s. I'm not sure exactly when this happened. My pawpaw called it the olden times or the wagon times. There was a family that used to live right next to Little Cypress. Well, they built their house in a flood zone and I guess their house got flooded or whatever and they had to move out of there. So what happened is just before their house actually got flooded, there was an incident where something had gone into their pig stall and carried off all of their hogs. And then something had gotten into their chicken pen. It didn't touch the chickens. It took all of the eggs. And then something had gotten into their barn and took off with one of their horses and then took off with their goats and stuff like that. And this man had went through the woods after, you know, the last animal came up missing. He was just sick of it. He grabbed his gun and a couple of buddies and they went off into the woods following the Little Cypress where they believed whatever it was taking it had went down into, because it was, I guess, the only logical explanation as to where it would have went. They got down in there and there was the horse's head had been ripped off of its body and shoved onto a broken tree branch about 15 feet in the air on I believe they said it was a pine or oak or something like that. And the story was told and passed down through my family from their family, because I guess my family knows their family. He said that there was, I guess, a holly tree or something like that not too far from there. And they found, you know, a couple of broken eggs right there. So they kept following this stuff. And this brings us back to this mound where, you know, my Uncle Larry and Uncle Bob had led up to. They followed it down back in there. And he said that they followed it, the trail of where they think it may have went. He said they don't know for sure. If anybody's ever been down in the thick woods like that, they know that even in the middle of the day, it's still pretty dark in the woods because it's so thick. It was, noon, and you could barely see a whole bunch, especially where they were at. I mean, there was light, yeah, but it was like it was cloudy outside and raining and stuff. But it was sunny outside of the trees and shady inside. So they, when something steps down on the leaves, you can't really see the impression and stuff like that because the leaves cover it. But you can kind of see like somewhat of a trail, I guess. It's prints. And they followed it to what I believe is the same mound. Whether it is or isn't, I don't know. But they found the horse outside, and they found bones and stuff of a hog, and they were all in a pile. And it had piled leaves and stuff on top of it. And there's like a mound, and there's a big hole. And this guy goes, I'm going to see what's in there. And he goes to go in there, and something snatches him and drags him down in there. And he's never seen it again. The other two guys, I guess, hightail it and get out of Dodge. That's as far as that story goes. I don't know too much more about that. If I recall correctly, that's what was said to me. So that family, had the flooded house. They moved or whatever. Now, my papa told me that these things have been there since the Quaker days or whatever. He thought they were Quakers. But here's the thing. My nanny seems to think, from what she was telling me, that they've always been there, that it's something that's always been around. Obviously, they're old, or, it's one family group or whatever. She said, but they only really create a problem towards the end of summer into, she thinks, like March or so of the next year. And then all of a sudden they're not really around. I guess they follow the deer, and then they follow their food sources and stuff, which makes sense because if it's a large omnivorous animal, it has to follow a food source, especially if it's wild. Which brings me into some of the things that my nanny and papa really tried to explain to me growing up. They try to tell me that these things are real. They're out there. Don't ever go in the woods by yourself, stuff like that. The stories that they're telling me are not for me to be scared or to try to pull my leg or anything like that. It's just cautionary tales. The way my papa explained it is if you ever go to a creek and you have a fear of getting in the water, it's because throughout generations, that fear is a primal instinct inside of you because, at some point something dragged one of our people or one of our kind into the water to eat it. That was instilled there. It's that primal knowledge. You have to understand and follow that. That's your gut feeling that you're, oh, wait, maybe I need to think about this twice before I do it type of thing. He said that's whenever you're in the woods and you feel like you're being watched, you're being watched. If you're ever in the woods and you feel like you need to get out of that area, you need to get out of that area. Don't continue to travel down through where they're at and stuff like that. I'll have to remember the other stories at a later date.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.